Minecraft has a lot of blocks, which means there are a lot of things you can do with those blocks in terms of building and details. And today I wanted to show you a few of the more obscure of these details to try and give you some inspiration for your builds. These could be various uncommon textures that you don't normally see, or some very interesting building techniques, maybe using some items in ways you might not expect. So first off, I wanted to show off some ceilings. Now this one is nothing special, this is kind of the base room that I'm going to be using here, to showcase how the different ceilings can change how the roof of your build looks. First up here we have a variant of that ceiling, which just adds some oak beams going across, a very simple addition, but I wanted to start off simple, just kind of showing how you can add a little bit of extra depth. This is better than it just being flat like that over there. A similar thing here, we've got a beam going down the middle, but then we have some other kinds of tiles here. So I've got these dark oak trapdoors, which look like tiles I quite like. They also look like pieces of chocolate, which I also quite like. But then in the middle here, we've got daylight detectors. That is the bottom of the daylight detector, and I think that is a very interesting texture that a lot of people might not know exists. So we're using that for the ceiling as well. I think that's a very nice texture, and any of these blocks I'm using here could just be used in, on their own. They don't have to go together in this way. I just wanted to kind of showcase a few different combinations that you can do with them. But this is totally valid, and I think literally just tiling that can work, because sometimes the ceiling is kind of the bit that you want to draw the least attention to in the build. You kind of want to maybe be looking down most of the time at what's on the floor, especially if you're in like a survival base. We've got a third variant of this room here that uses some other types of blocks. On the ceiling we have the spruce trap door, which is a very nice kind of block that can go in a line like that. It's a very interesting texture, kind of looks a bit like reinforced, very medieval. That can work for walls, floors, whatever. It adds just that little extra bit of detail, kind of adds that kind of riveted effect. It's going all the way across there. A similar thing here is the side of the barrel, which has those kind of metal bits that's kind of looks like it's really been held together, and very rugged and sturdy build here. Then this texture is the bottom of the barrel, which is a very nice kind of wooden plank texture. It just adds a little bit of more interesting texture there than having it be the regular wooden plank texture that we've seen thousands of times in builds before. And then the middle here, a little bit of a brighter touch. I think this would go more well with like acacia and stuff. The bottom of the composter, very interesting texture that I don't really see many people using at all. I'll show you how it looks next to some acacia. Yeah, that fits in a little bit more, but it's that kind of browny orange color. It's a very nice shade. Here's another example of how you can use the barrels in more of a flooring design. The same plank texture there. It just adds a little bit more interest, I think, a little bit more texture. I don't know, I just really like this texture in particular. And I suppose this one could also be used for a ceiling as well as a floor. One other thing you can do is you can use the barrel in a different way here. You can have the actual like straps on the barrel going off each one of these things here. These are just a few miscellaneous designs that I threw together for these. I think the composter sides are quite good for the bottom of a pillar like this. It might even go well in the middle of a pillar. That's alright, that might work well for like a wall even maybe. You have that kind of horizontal line going through. That's quite nice actually. Something like this. Does that look cool? I think it does look cool as like a trim around the top of a wall here. The barrel works well for the bottom of a pillar too. I think you've probably seen this one before. And obviously as well as the composter, it will look good as a centerpiece to your wall. Just breaking up that kind of monotonous, samey texture just by putting something else different in the middle. Bonus of it being a barrel, it acts as storage. If you want some like kind of discreet hidden storage, you can hide it as a part of the texturing in your wall. Kind of wanted to experiment more with full blocks because I do a lot of things with like stairs and slabs and stuff. I kind of wanted to experiment a little bit more with what full blocks can do. This flooring is very nice, I think. It's another kind of tiled thing. We're using andesite and polished andesite, and then the centerpiece for all of these tiles is the lodestone. Obviously each of these costs one netherite ingot, so yeah, quite expensive. For this you need the equivalent of one netherite block to do these 9 here, so bit more of a late game thing, and for those kind of hardcore players who like grinding for netherite. something like this is a lot more pleasing to the eye, for me at least, than a checkerboard pattern like this, just using 2 blocks, or just doing 1 block on its own. That double checkerboard pattern where you've got 2 blocks in the checkerboard is a lot more appealing. Again, I think depending on your build palette, this could be a good base for things. When I'm building stuff like lampposts or something that sits on like a wall or a fence, I often like to put a block beneath it that kind of acts as a transition into the environment. I don't like it as much when they're just sitting on grass or whatever block you happen to have there. This has that nice square line going around it that does integrate the pillar or whatever you have into the world quite nicely. But as I said, it's quite expensive, so maybe you want to do this for just like really special pillars. The side texture of the lodestone is one of my favourite like detail textures. It's a shame I can't use it more, but I do love it quite a lot. It's just a nice pattern that you can kind of slot into any build. I think honestly it's a better design than something like the chiseled blocks. I do like the chiseled stone bricks, but one problem I have with it is that the center is not centered, it's an odd number. That is a more intricate design, and it's also centered. And because it's got that kind of hole in there, a lot of items can slot into it. The chains are quite nice. Maybe if you have some chains going across your ceiling or something and you want a block to kind of bridge that corner, or if you have a chain maybe coming out of your wall, that could act as like the source of where the chain is coming from. Lightning rods work well too, they sit very well in the center there, as do end rods. And then I have an actual build here as well that is taken right from my base in my survival world, which I actually haven't built yet. This is just from the kind of design that I did, where we're using the end rods as the starting point of the chandelier here. And I really like how the chandelier came out actually. It's very minimal, but also packs in quite a bit of detail. And yeah, we're using the lodestone as the kind of centerpiece, and then the end rods come out of it quite naturally. And in survival as well, it's kind of a flex because you're using a lodestone in your build, and well, I mean, if the diamonds weren't enough, you know. Also in my base in particular, this is in the dead center of the build, so I can actually use the lodestone for what it's meant to be used for, and create a lodestone compass that will always point me towards the exact center of my base. Really like this block. It's just a shame how expensive it is. Maybe I'll grind for some netherite and use it in my survival worlds. Next I have some ideas for the beehive. Very nice textures on here. The front is quite nice with that kind of handle. The side textures are equally nice with those kind of horizontal lines going through. The top and bottom textures are some of my favourite textures in this entire game. I would say that I like this texture more than the actual oak planks in the game. One problem I have with planks is I like symmetry quite a bit in my builds. One thing that's hard to do with planks is you can't really be exactly symmetrical because the lines always point in the same direction. No matter what you do, you cannot get those lines to rotate. But with something like the beehive, you can place it in any which way you want and the texture rotates depending on how you place it. So you can do some really interesting and intricate patterns with that for either your floors or your ceilings. It's something that I wish these could do, or maybe you could craft a variant of planks that face the other way, because that would open up a lot more opportunities than the planks currently have. Plus I kind of like the more softer texture that this has. These lines can sometimes be a little bit harsh when you're moving around and stuff. This is a lot more smooth and subtle. Here we have an application for them. They can run along the edge of a path. That is something that you couldn't do with planks. If you had a turn in this path, for example, you could continue that and carry it on going down the side of the path in this direction. Maybe for the corner, you'd want to use a block like this that's not got any kind of directionality to it. Very clean, very slick. If you're wanting this more bright, like wooden color palette to your base, I don't think you can go wrong with this block. Just 3 blocks are used in this entire path, but I think it's very effective. You could put some fences along here or something. A lot of the time I actually prefer to use fence gates over fences because I just really like how they look sometimes. Sometimes it's a little bit too much, so maybe you want to add a few fences to break it up a little bit. But yeah, that look is very nice. We have another flooring design here with that same kind of checkerboard style. We're using the beehives pointing inwards towards the stripped oak, so they're not all in the same direction. That is something you can do with the beehive texture that you can't do with the regular regular planks. Again, very nice pattern. If you want this kind of colour palette, that's a good flooring for the interior of your base. That's something that people struggle with, I think. They build a very cool exterior and then don't really know what to put for the flooring or the ceiling or whatever inside the base. This is an interesting wall. Obviously, the actual wall texture itself is not using the beehives in any way. This is just kind of a checkerboard again. I just really like how that looks. It gives a lot of depth. It's because the stripped oak has that shadow on the end. When you're looking at it from quite far away, it does give that illusion of more depth in there, when in reality it's just a flat wall. For this one in particular, the beehives are being used as the kind of trim for this. I really like how it separates the bottom from the top. If this just went all the way down to the floor, it would kind of just look like it hits the floor and then just stops abruptly. But when you have this kind of transition into the floor, it makes it look more like how a wall would actually be built in the real world. And you can also use it for various other interior decoration techniques. For example, these cupboards here, or drawers. So here we have a kind of like wardrobe-ish type thing, or maybe it's some kind of like cabinet or something. The block itself here looks like a drawer, I think. It looks kind of like a filing cabinet or some kind of drawer. Having it there makes it look like this is some kind of storage, and I really do like that. Same with these drawers or cabinets up here. I think looks a lot like a kitchen type thing. Maybe if you're building something that's more rural, this would make a good block for your kitchen area, your kitchen cabinets. You could also add beams in using this very, very nice texture. I'm so glad Mojang puts all this care and attention into all the different textures and how blocks can be used in ways that they were definitely not intended to be used in. The stripped oak looks nice too, I think. Very interesting. Over here we've got a quadruple combo of the smithing table, blast furnace, regular furnace, and shulker box. You could do some very interesting stuff with these normally functional blocks. Again, it's a similar concept to all the other flooring you've been seeing in this video, but this time we have the polished basalt to bridge the gap in between the smithing tables here. I've got some different rows of various blocks here, just kind of showing different ones that could go in the middle. Going along here we have a blast furnace, we have some polished deep slate, the regular furnace, and then the grey shulker box. A benefit of having these functional blocks in the floor is you can still use them. These shulker boxes could be some more kind of discrete storage. Then the bottom of the smithing table is the total opposite to the top. It's a very nice like velvety red texture that goes very well in a more royal and regal build. Here we have like a royal pattern in the carpet I quite like, but it's nicer I think than just using a block like spruce planks or mangrove planks. It goes very well with the colour of mangrove as well. Here we have another wall that I'm honestly not the hugest fan of, but I thought I'd include it anyway since I built it. We've got a checkerboard pattern between the smooth stone and the smooth stone slabs. That is quite nice too, and honestly for a wall, I do quite like this kind of texture more. I think it just kind of draws your eyes more across the wall rather than having it kind of scattered across the checkerboard pattern. Similar thing with this where we've got the horizontal texture going across. Having something like this at the bottom of your wall again adds that kind of trim, integrates it more into the rest of the build. This is the side texture of the blast furnace, by the way. Of course, in your actual build, you might want to add a little bit more depth to this, maybe dotting some walls in, or maybe even making something jut out of the wall if you're using it on the outside of a build. Another very interesting texture I found is the bottom of the loom. It's a very kind of plain texture, and it makes me wonder if this actually went unfinished when they implemented this block. But I kind of like it. It's very simple. We have it in a ceiling here. It's a very similar colour to the mangrove wood. I think having the mangrove in this direction is actually nicer because the grain of the wood goes that way, kind of goes the opposite way to how you place it. And then in the walls here, we have the side texture of the smoker, which I think looks very much like some kind of supports, maybe some wooden supports that have been put in. I've put these cracked stone bricks in here to kind of give off the vibe that maybe this build is kind of crumbling, it's maybe falling apart a little bit. So these wooden supports have been put in to kind of reinforce it a little bit so it doesn't just crumble and fall apart. And I also think it looks a lot like shelves. If you have a build that has this kind of grey, stony aesthetic to it, these might do as good wall shelves, like a kitchen or a study or something. And then you could even have the spruce trap doors, which have a very similar colour, as little other shelves jutting out that you can put your various different items on. I got a flower pot and some candles and a lantern in this build. Then over here we have another kind of ceiling, or it could be a floor I suppose, where we're just using furnaces as our tiles. Just the singular block we're using as a tile. And then in the corners, I think this makes a very interesting corner block, is the bottom texture for the smoker. Talking about the smoker, it has some other uses too. The top texture is very nice. As I said before, with the lodestone, I like it when things fit into other things, and this is a very interesting block for integrating things into the floor like this. If you have something like a fence or a wall or something like a lightning rod, again it integrates it into the rest of the build very nicely. I have a few simple designs for lights here, literally just using the dark oak fence and then a light block on top. So we've got a candle, torch and a lantern there. Deep slate walls go quite well with it. This lamppost design I'm really quite fond of. I don't have them enabled right now, but you could also probably put a hanging sign underneath there. There we go, I got it working with World Edit. That looks very nice, I think. And it uses a smoker to fit into the actual environment very nicely, I think. And here we have some very interesting floors with the top texture of the loom. I'm just kidding. I'm using these for a ceiling here, the bottom texture, not the top. Honestly, that texture is a kind of an eyesore when you use it that much. Yeah, the bottom is interesting when you tile it in different ways because it does rotate depending on which direction you place it in. So you can have some interesting patterns like this with the kind of like highlight. You can have it kind of have that zigzag effect to it if you want. Or you can go for something more simple like this where one line is going one way and then another line is going the other. And last but not least for ceilings and stuff, I'm using the bottom texture for the stone cutter, which again is another texture that you can rotate in any way you want. And I think this looks a lot like ceiling tiles that you might see in a school or an office building or something. And I've also put in some fluorescent lights here. I really like this technique where you can use the levers to kind of attach the end rods to a ceiling like that. I'm a big fan of that. So this is kind of an abrupt ending, but I decided to cut the video off here. I did have a couple of other things I built for this video, but then I kind of realized that they didn't fit in with all the other details in this video, so I think I'll be including them in their own video in future. So subscribe if you want to see them, because there's some quite interesting details there. If you want to help support me, I do have a Patreon and a Ko-Fi. If you want to see more content from me, it would really help me out if you press that subscribe button down below, because I really want this channel to be a success, and I mean, so far it has been more successful than I imagined it would be, so thank you for that. And I don't want to keep rambling on for too long, so I'll just say thank you for watching, and I will see you in whatever the next video is.